Just a few weeks ago, Gen Z caused a huge, seismic shift in politics when they elected self-proclaimed democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani, who basically won an entire election by focusing on one single word: affordability. Now, whether his solutions will actually work is a different story. But whatever ends up happening in New York City, I'm incredibly grateful for one very important reason. Everybody finally has been forced to admit that this is a serious issue and end this insane BS gaslighting that it's all your own fault and you just need to work harder and save more. I mean, people are literally working 60 hours a week, going to food banks, skipping meals, and you're just going to sit up there with a straight face and tell them that it's all their fault and nothing is wrong with this broken system that charges an arm and a leg for rent. Now, thanks to Gen Z, everybody's been forced to acknowledge this as a serious problem. So in the wake of Mamdani's win, politicians from both sides began scrambling for solutions as it became very clear that Gen Z was fed up. And given that Gen Z is a much stronger voting base now, if these politicians want to keep their jobs, they better start coming up with real solutions to make rent and life in general more affordable for Gen Z and for all the rest of us as well. But that being said, as you'd expect from these old, out-of-touch politicians, the solutions they came up with were just totally I mean, the president obviously didn't like Mamdani's policy of freezing the rent, so he proposed a much better, totally genius solution that I don't know why no one thought of this before. A 50-year mortgage. So let's do the math on this. The average human life expectancy is 76 years. This means that you'd have to earn enough to pay for a mortgage at the age of 26, which probably less than 1% of people can do in this economy, just to have the privilege of maybe being able to pay off your house by the time you're on your deathbed. And this is the absolute best case scenario, by the way. We still haven't factored in the interest rates, the potential market shifts that are bound to happen along the way. I mean, there's literally just so much wrong with this idea that there's not even enough time to cover it all in one video, and even his own supporters are turning on him for this. So since no one's offering real great solutions right now, I kind of had a Thanos-like, fine, I'll just do it myself then moment. And so that's exactly what we're about to do right now. Solution number 1, bringing back multi-generational households. All right, so I'll start off by admitting that yes, multi-generational households are just a fancy way of saying just live with your parents. Now, I know for a lot of you, living with your parents for whatever reason isn't an option, so don't worry. I got you covered in solution number 2 later on. As I said, a multi-generational household is just living with your parents with better branding, optics, and terminology. But hey, it turns out these things actually do matter. Let me give you an example of how the other side uses it against you so you can see just how insidious and effective it is. During my travels in my mid-20s, I ended up visiting the UK for a few months. It was there when I learned that the UK has a scheme that apparently is there to help young people get into the labor force easier, and they call them apprenticeships. And I gotta admit, the word itself sounds really nice and rolls off the tongue quite well. But when you look into what it actually is, there's literally absolutely zero difference between an apprenticeship and child labor. Apprenticeship programs literally siphon 16-year-old minors into underpaid training programs where they're literally expected to work and study full-time for barely half the national minimum wage. Now, I'm not here to debate economics in this video. If you want to make the capitalist argument that this is actually good because the minimum wage makes it harder for young people to get jobs or whatever, I disagree, but that's a different topic for a different day. But what I'm not going to allow you to get away with is the dishonest rebranding of the optics of forcing a 16-year-old to work for half the minimum wage. It is absolutely child labor through and through, only with a different, more elegant sounding name. And hey, if you want to argue that child labor is great for the economy and tremendously boosts capitalist profits, go right ahead. You can make that argument if you want, but then you are going to have to take responsibility and deal with the horrible optics of defending child labor. And they know this as well, which is why they've cleverly rebranded it as an apprenticeship, because they don't want to be associated with defending child labor, even though that's literally exactly what they're doing. Anyways, now you've seen a perfect example of just how powerful of a drug optics can be. It's literally allowed the government to continuously get away with child labor just by giving it a cuter, fancier name. So if they can rebrand child labor as opportunity, then we can absolutely rebrand living with your parents as economic wisdom. So back to multi-generational households and why it's the simplest yet most brutally efficient solution to all of this. As many of you know, I'm generally pretty anti-capitalist, but that doesn't mean I'm incapable of depth and nuance. There are certain things that free markets run pretty effectively, mostly commodities, meaning things that you may want but don't necessarily need for basic survival. If a big screen TV suddenly doubled in price overnight, I can simply choose to not buy the TV. But if rent suddenly doubles in price, which is exactly what we've all experienced these last few years, I can't just refuse to pay rent in the exact same way I refuse to pay for the TV, because otherwise I'll literally get evicted and go homeless. In order to ensure an actual free market, I have to have the ability to say no, and this is exactly what multi-generational households allow you to do. Now, last week I made a video comparing the life of an average Gen Zer to that of a pre-industrial farming family. Someone made a very interesting point in the comments, a very good point, which was that although life was undoubtedly difficult back then, at least all the work they did and all the wealth they generated stayed within the family. Nowadays, we're expected to move out just for some stupid lesson of hard work, and for what? So that we can be exploited at our wage slave jobs, make our bosses rich, make our landlords rich, make the government rich, make literally everybody except ourselves and our families rich. Like a lot of you, I was expected to move out of the house and pay rent on my own at 18. An insane, unrealistic expectation in this economy. But beyond that, it was an insanely stupid financial decision, even for my boomer parents who wanted me to move out in the first place. Now, I left the States 10 years ago, and rent back then wasn't nearly as bad as what you guys are dealing with right now. But despite that, you'll still see how insanely stupid of a decision this was. I moved around a lot in my early 20s and had different living arrangements all the time, but I think it'd be pretty fairly accurate to say my rent averaged out to around $500 per month back then. This comes out to around $6,000 per year, and if we were to multiply that by the 12 years from ages 18 to 30, this comes out to a whopping $72,000 total. This is money that could have been invested into Bitcoin, used to buy a cheap property somewhere, put into some family trust fund, or even just held in cash for a comfortable amount of savings. Instead, it was all flushed completely down the drain to greedy landlords and corporations, with absolutely nothing to show for it. When I look back on it, this was far and away the biggest waste of money in my life. I've spent $700 on a laptop, $500 on a PS5, and hell, even a couple hundred on a weightlifting set. And guess what? I still own and benefit off these purchases all these years later. Rent, on the other hand, cost way more than even those purchases every single month. And it's literally just money that's flushed down the toilet, never to be seen again. One thing important to understand is that throughout most of the world and most of human history, multi-generational households were overwhelmingly the norm, the majority, and not the exception. So there's literally nothing to be ashamed of for this. Billions of humans have done this for millennia. The only reason we get shamed for it now is because our boomer parents grew up in the one exceptional time in history where the economy was so good, it actually made sense to move out at 18. Now, needless to say, those days are long gone, so it only makes sense to adjust cultural expectations accordingly. And this isn't to say that you should never move out either. If you're one of the lucky few who lands the successful career in this economy and you want to enjoy the bright lights of the big city, by all means, more power to you. But the point is that moving out and paying rent should be treated as a commodity, a luxury, and not a baseline expectation. In the same way a big screen plasma TV is a luxury and not a baseline expectation, we should absolutely celebrate and encourage those who worked hard to buy this big screen TV with their hard-earned money. But we don't constantly shame people for not having a TV either. And moving out should be seen and treated in the exact same way. Hey guys, we set out on a mission during the summer to take down the biggest, most vile Gen Z hater, the Angry Guy. A straight up horrible human being who hates Gen Z so much, he even celebrates them dying. Thanks to you, we've gained a ton of ground on him over the summer, and we've set a new goal to surpass him in subscribers and defeat him once and for all by the end of the year. So, if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us take down the biggest, most evil, final boss Gen Z hater. With your help, we can absolutely do this. Solution number 2, a tenants union. So, you've heard of labor unions and labor strikes at this point. The idea is to use your strength in numbers to be able to stand up to the elites and protect yourself from exploitation. They may be able to underpay and exploit one guy, but if everyone in the union goes on strike, now they have serious problems. A tenants union is essentially the same idea as a labor union, but far more brutally effective. The successes or failures of labor unions are very complicated, to say the least. Whether when it comes to negotiating for better wages or organizing labor strikes, corporations have deep pockets and in a lot of cases can just wait out a labor strike for longer than the workers can live without a paycheck. Rent strikes, however, are a different beast altogether. If a tenant union bands together and all collectively agrees to stop paying rent until the landlords lower the price, it's fundamentally different and more effective than a labor strike because rather than withholding labor, which is an expense for the company, you're withholding rent, which is the direct revenue source for the landlord. This directly hits the greedy landlords where it hurts, their bank accounts. And there's really not much they can do about it. Sure, they can evict one single person relatively easily, but evicting everybody all at once is a total legal nightmare and not to mention very unprofitable for their bottom line. And we all know there's literally nothing they care about more than profits. Now you might be thinking, this all sounds great in theory, but does it actually work? Well, fortunately, we have a bunch of real life stories that show, yes, it absolutely does. The Kansas City Tenants Union members gained major concessions from their landlord. The successful negotiation led to the end of a historic rent strike that they say is the longest to ever occur in the region. In early June, residents of the Independence Towers in Kansas, Missouri ended an 8-month rent strike victoriously after reaching a deal with the property's new owner, Dynasty Properties of Illinois. Echoing the tactics of the labor movement, KCTU tenants negotiated a collective contract that stabilizes rents and imposes deadlines to complete major building repairs. Residents began their strike in October of 2024 in response to deteriorating living conditions and long-standing maintenance problems. Tenants reported holes in the ceiling, persistent pests, no air conditioning or heating, and non-functional appliances. Under the deal with Dynasty, residents will get the opportunity to renew their leases and will not owe any back rent from the strike. According to KC tenants, the more than $289,000 withheld during the strike will not have to be repaid. In addition, the agreement sets new rent prices. Tenants will either pay the same amount or see a slight increase, and some may even end up paying less. Tenants will also get the option to sign a lease for a second year, with any rent increase capped at 5%. There is also now a grace period for late rent payments and a ban on junk fees. The new landlords also agreed to make major repairs, including the HVAC system, by November. While HVAC repairs are ongoing, tenants will receive a $75 monthly rent discount. The agreement also includes commitments to repair plumbing and to initiate building-wide pest control and in-unit repairs by the end of 2025. Crucially, the new contract also dictates that the landlord will not retaliate against tenants who organize with the tenant union.